Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Agati in New York.
And I'm Luci Liebfried in Chicago. You are listening to one of the highest-rated paranormal radio shows on Blog Talk. No bull, no lies, just a true platform for everyone to share their knowledge and experiences. When searching for the truth, good communication is key. Now, the phone lines are open for questions or stories. The number to call is 661-244-9831. Make sure you press the number 1 to get into the queue. We'll try to get to you as soon as we can. Otherwise, our chat room is open for questions, comments. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paranormal Review Radio. You'll find more articles, blogs, and full show uploads. And if you have specific questions or comments or would like to be a guest on the show, email us at paranormal.review@aol.com. Now, sit back, get comfy, and prepare to open your minds. It's time for Paranormal Review Radio.
Hosting a show about the paranormal and sharing personal experiences with ghosts and spirits, we come across many people who do not believe the same things we believe. Some, in fact, try and debunk or just proclaim the paranormal does not exist without even doing hard investigative work. Do Luci and I proclaim that we have true evidence for the paranormal? No. Do we believe in the experiences we encounter could possibly be paranormal? Yes. But we are also conscious of what the great minds are thinking and concluding, even though it may not agree with our stance. That's the whole point of investigating the paranormal. It's the idea that all minds and all theories should be discussed and weighed heavily when making a belief. As Luci always says in her intro, good communication is key, and that's what we'll have tonight. Joe Nickell is a senior research fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, an international scientific organization, and an investigative columnist for Skeptical Inquirer magazine, a former professional stage magician for the Houdini Magical Hall of Fame and private investigator for world-famous detective agency. Dr. Nickell taught technical writing for several years at the University of Kentucky before taking the full-time position with CSI at its offices at the Center for Inquiry in Amherst, New York. Utilizing his varied background, Nickell has become widely known as an investigator of myths and mysteries, frauds, forgeries, and hoaxes. He has been called the modern Sherlock Holmes, the original Ghostbuster, and the real-life Scully. He has investigated scores of haunted house cases, including the Amityville Horror and the Mackenzie House in Toronto, Canada. He has also helped to expose the forgeries and hoaxes of the Diary of Jack the Ripper and the Shroud of Turin. Mr. Nickell was an inspiration for Hilary Swank's role as miracle investigator in the 2007 movie The Reaping. He's the author of more than 20 books and regularly appears on TV and radio to discuss his investigations. Please help me in giving a warm welcome to the real-life Scully himself, Joe Nickell, to the show. Hi, Joe. Thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hi, Joe. We're so glad that you found the time to join us.
My pleasure.
Well, you know what? You absolutely have my dream job. The fact that you're a paid professional investigator, that's just so cool. And how did you start all this?
Well, you know, they say the secret to life is to find out what you'd like to do. Of course, you do have to actually be able to do it. You can't want to be an opera singer and be unable to carry a tune. But then you find someone who will pay you to do it, and that's pretty much what I did. I was a young magician at the Houdini Hall of Fame, and met James Randi, and I wanted to do something like that. I wanted to go out and investigate claims, not to debunk them, but actually look into them and see what might be the case. And I started there with McKenzie House, and went on site and found out that that people really were hearing footsteps on the stairs late at night when there was no one in the house and the house was locked. And of course, I soon found the answer to that, and that was that there was a parallel iron staircase in the building next door, about 40 inches away. And it just burned through my brain. This is what you do. You must go on site, no armchair work. You must go there as if it were a crime scene, and you must actually look for evidence, and that evidence should lead you to the most likely conclusion. And I thought if I did that, people would believe me and they would love me for it. But alas, I get a lot of hatred from people who don't like my answers. But I'm still convinced after all these years, more than 40 years later, I'm still convinced that's the way to do it.
Mhm. Well, you know what, Joe, as Anthony mentioned, you've written over 20 books, including Relics of Christ, The Science of Ghosts, The Science of Miracles, just to name a few. And all of them include the many cases that you've been on. And you covered so much in your work and in your books. How do you go about choosing your cases? Like, is there any type of criteria that they have to have before you'll take on a case?
Well, I look for a couple of things. One, I rarely ever take any reports from people. I don't want people to call me and ask me to come and investigate. I found that so many of these people were psychotic or were looking for attention, or they thought they had some big deal, and it was, I wasn't going to be able to fly to Kansas to look at a third-rate haunting with no evidence. So I pick the cases. And either I pick something that pretty much cries out to be investigated because it's like the Amityville horror, just, somebody's got to look into it. And so I did a number of cases like that. The Atlanta House of Blood would be another example of something that was just called out for me to come and investigate. And on the other hand, I occasionally find something that's just interesting. It's maybe not that big a deal in terms of the news media, or not that well known. It may be, in fact, a case. I just looked into one in British Columbia over a century ago, and but it will be one that interests me, something that I think has unusual features, or I think, to give you an example of the Atlanta House of Blood, if you know anything about that, it was a case many years ago. An elderly couple in Atlanta had reported to the police that there were some kind of ghost poltergeist that was strewing streams of blood in their house. And the police went and investigated, and sure enough, there was blood on the walls and floor here and there. And they concluded that it was not a crime scene, and that they suspected maybe that the couple was looking for attention, but they weren't interested, and they closed the case. Meanwhile, of course, it was getting all this paranormal attention, and everybody was interested, and the story was getting blown out of all proportion. So it was suggested to me that I look into it, and the first opportunity I had to be in Atlanta, I was able to meet with the Atlanta Homicide Task Force, and they did allow me to have access to their files on the case. And as soon as I looked at crime scene photographs, because I have a strong background in forensic science without myself being a forensic scientist, but I've written a textbook on the case and on the subject. So as soon as I looked at the crime scene photos, I could see that there were This was a case where blood pattern analysis would be very, very useful. This would tell us a whole lot about how the blood got where it got. So I knew a nationally prominent blood pattern analyst who sort of owed me a favor, and I called in my marker, and she gave me a detailed report. And it turned out that the blood was not happening the way the couple was describing, that it came out of the walls or sprung up from the floor, but in fact had been squirted onto the walls and the floor, giving the lie to their supposed eyewitness claims and pretty much tallying with the police suspicion that it was a hoax. So that's a good example of a kind of case where I needed to get, it sort of combines the two features I was talking about. I needed to get involved because it was getting a lot of attention. And secondly, once I took a first look, I saw a possible way towards resolving the mystery. And that will bring me in just about every time.
Well, that leads me to my next question. You know, as you mentioned, you've been a stage magician and you've been a private detective. Now, one involves illusion and the other involves discovering the truth. And I see exactly where the private detective works for you. But does being a magician give you an edge in investigating the paranormal?
Oh, I think absolutely it does by leaps and bounds. It's no coincidence that Houdini exposed so many bogus spiritualists as a magician, or that James Randi, who's turned out to catch a number of phony psychics and claimants doing various allegedly paranormal phenomena that turned out to be done by trickery. It's not a coincidence, and there are many investigators of the paranormal who are magicians who are able to apply their skills. Maybe I can give you an example or two. The McKenzie house that I mentioned earlier was an example not of a magic trick, but it was an illusion, you see. People lying abed in the house at night would hear over there across the house where the staircase was, they would hear these footsteps, and there was no one on the stairs, right? So that's an illusion. That's an illusion that someone's walking on your staircase, but there's no one there. Ergo, it must be a ghost, people would say. And in fact, when I investigated, and it was amazing to me that this had gone on for some 10 years and that nobody before me, none of the so-called psychics, investigators, reporters, anybody dealing with this famous investigators, reporters, anybody dealing with this famous haunted house had ever gone next door. This was a real lesson to me. But I did, and I exposed the illusion, and it was just an auditory illusion. So that's one example. Another example, with more specific, using magic tricks, occurred at Camp Chesterfield. This is a rather notorious place where a village in Indiana where for over a century now, spiritualists have claimed to be able to talk to the dead and produce materializations and seances and the like. And I went there undercover and in disguise. And one of the things that I looked into during my several days there was at what's called a billet reading. This was held in a church. As you go in, you're given a little slip of paper, and you're told to write the names of some people who have passed over and to ask a question. So I went under the name Jim Collins, and I wrote the names of some Collins family members, and then I asked the question, "Mother, will you be with me always?" And I was very pointedly instructed at the door that I must fold the slip of paper exactly in half. As the woman said, if you fold it any other way, he won't read it. Now, this was a tip-off to me because as a magician, I know several ways to do billet reading. And I'll share one magician's secret here with you and your listeners if you all promise not to tell anyone. So what he was doing, if we allowed if you were the medium and you allowed people to just fold it any which way, one person might fold it into a triangle, another might pleat it, another might fold it in half and half again, and so on. So that when it was drawn, the slip was drawn out of the basket and held to his forehead, you might be able to say to yourself or your friends next to you, that's not my slip. That's not mine. And yet he seems to be knowing what's on it and reading it. Well, what he's doing is holding that slip to his forehead, but under cover of the podium or the lectern, he's actually flipping open your slip with his thumb. Do you see what I'm saying? So that he's pretending to be reading the slip held to the forehead, but he's actually physically looking secretly at your slip. And so he wants it to be able to just be flipped open with the thumb of one hand and not to have to use both hands to unfold it. So this is how that trick's done. Now, there are many other ways to do billet reading, but I needed to know just which one he was using. And he's doing readings for people, and they're crying in the aisles. I mean, they're getting messages from their dead mother and so forth. Finally, and I'm getting angrier and angrier sitting in the back. I don't think this is okay. I don't think it's funny. I don't think it's okay to let people believe, because they need to believe or any such thing. I just find this contemptible behavior. And so I'm sitting in the back and fuming, and finally he says, I have a message for the Collins family. So the old geezer in the back, with his cane and his made-up appearance, raises his hand, and the guy begins to read off Collins family names, and then said, "Your mother wants you to know she'll always be there for you." Now, it was, even to a skeptic like me, it was very moving. I was nearly on the verge of tears. And then I remembered that at that time my mother was still alive and wasn't named Mrs. Collins. And I felt so much better because I'd caught another cheat. I'd caught another fraud with a simple deception of my own. The old saying, you set a thief to catch a thief, well, that's what I did. That was in the Houdini tradition. James Randi has done things like that. I've known Randi for now many, many years and learned much from him. So that was an example of using my magician skills. I've been a magician and mentalist, and used those very specifically to catch a paranormal faker. So that'll give you some idea of how my magic background works. Either specific tricks or just the magician's ability to say, I know what it looked like. I saw that on stage. I saw the girl get in the box. It was all very fair. They assembled the box before my eyes. I see her get in. The next thing you know, they're disassembling the box and she's gone. How could this be possible? Well, a magician is going to be able to have some ideas about that.
Well, Joe, just recently, NASA astrophysicist and a group of astronomers just discovered that the universe actually may be expanding faster than they originally thought. And it sort of is now possibly maybe changing when and how the universe was created. And so, it got me to thinking, science is always changing with technology and society and advanced knowledge. So sometimes things today may not be true tomorrow. Have you ever thought that maybe possibly in the near future with science, the paranormal may be shown to have some truth?
Well, hope springs eternal, and it's always good to be able to fantasize. But look, if we haven't found a single ghost to date, isn't it likely there are no ghosts? I mean, the whole idea that you get up out of your body and you don't need your brain, you just get up out of your body, some kind of energy, and you're even wearing clothes, which of course is not a life energy but inanimate objects, but you're wearing clothes, there are very few naked ghosts, and you're walking around without a brain, able to have perfect motor activity, to walk, talk, and say boo. How likely is that? I mean, it's just not likely at all. So I don't think it's very likely that since we haven't found for sure a ghost yet, science has not authenticated a single ghost, not one yet.
Right.
No matter what people say, or no matter what fringe scientist or pseudoscientist makes a declaration, I'm telling you, mainstream science has not yet found a ghost. And if anybody could find it, it wouldn't be silly ghost hunters with Radio Shack equipment. I think it would be mainstream scientists. But what I do is not to decide in advance that something couldn't be so, because I don't want to be any more a debunker than in my approach to things. I would just be the flip side of the true believer. That is, someone who's decided what they believe in advance of inquiry. So I just suspend my disbelief. I just put it aside, and I go to the haunted house, and I say, okay, let's see what's going on here. Let's see. And what I'm trying to do is not get into the belief business. Science is not about belief, but I'm trying to get into the evidence business. And so I'm looking to, and this is the important word here, explain what's happening. So, for example, in several instances of haunted houses, I've personally caught a ghost red-handed, by which I mean a prankster. Just personally caught them. And so I know that in those cases it's not a ghost. And if I can explain that to you, the circumstances in which I caught a ghost and how I went about this, and I can explain it to you in a way that you can understand it and believe it, then I don't need to be a debunker. The debunking just takes care of itself. But the next case, I will do the same thing again, and some of my skeptical friends will think, well, for heaven's sakes, how many of these damned haunted houses do you have to go into before you decide they're no good? I said, well, I've already decided that ghosts are very, very unlikely. Very unlikely. But I could be wrong. Science, as you suggest, could be wrong. Maybe we're somehow missing something, though you would think eventually we should know. But what I'm trying to do is go and explain what's happening. And I do the same with, let's say, Bigfoot. I've done a lot of work over the last 3 or 4 years with the question of Bigfoot. I've been out many times, was recognized recently in southern Pennsylvania by some Bigfooters who saw me in a campground. I was staying in a cabin in the Laurel Highlands, and they said, are you Joe Nickell? And I said, yes. And they were very cordial to me because, they know that I am out there the same way they are. I just have a different orientation as to what I'm expecting and so on. But they know very well that I'm looking at evidence, and they, by and large, I think, respect me for it.
Well, there seems to be paranormal claims exponentially increasing. I mean, over the last 10 years, I've noticed, and I think it's been due to the media and, possibly technology now that everybody's got smartphones and, the software that goes along with it. You can make anything up. But what are you finding when investigating claims as to the reason why paranormal has sort of become a household name?
Well, I think you're onto something when you mention the things you did, the media and so forth. I think, to back up a little bit, I think the paranormal has always been of interest, and I think it never will go away. You could clone 10 of me, 20 of me, 100 of me, give us a big expense account, send us, and there would still be paranormal. Wouldn't matter. Because I think the paranormal promises very big things. If ghosts are real, then we don't really die, do we?
Right.
If there are, and I was asking you that question because I'm having some glimmering of lights, and I'm afraid my power might be threatened here for some reason. Maybe it's storming outside. I'll turn some lights down. Maybe it's a poltergeist.
Maybe I was just going to say that.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Maybe it's a ghost.
Exactly. Exactly. Somehow these non-physical beings are able to be quite physical. But if ghosts are real, we don't really die. If flying saucers are real, then we're not alone in the universe. If psychics are real, then maybe we can get a handle on, get a warning for something that's about to happen and avert fate, and so on. So there are huge promises made by the paranormal. The problem is they don't deliver, but there are huge promises. And if we were voting, we would vote for these things, I think. A few of the paranormal things are not hopeful, like the ones I mentioned, monsters and so forth. But even there, just as one set of things appeals to our hopes, another set can appeal to our fears. And so we're hopeful and fearful people, and we're using our emotions. So when some skeptic comes along and explains to us very rationally why it's unlikely that Bigfoot exists, we're like ships passing in the night, because people aren't believing that with the organ above the neck. They're feeling it in their heart or in their gut. The difference between sort of emotional belief and very cool logical belief is quite different. So I think there's a willingness to believe, and the paranormal is functioning. I'll give you my secret to the paranormal. The paranormal is different than other kinds of scientific evidence because it's based on negative evidence. We don't actually have a ghost. We don't actually have a Bigfoot. We don't actually have a flying saucer, no matter what you may have heard. But what we have are basically versions of, I don't know. I don't know what that noise was in the old house. Must be a ghost. Don't know what that bright light zipping across the sky was. Must be a flying saucer of another planet. I don't know why Mrs. Smith's cancer went into remission. Must be a miracle of the Holy Virgin Mary. So what the paranormal is we don't know, and the inference or the declaration that therefore we do know it's the paranormal. But that's a logical fallacy. You can't say, I don't know, therefore I do know, right? I mean, you can't do that. It's a logical fallacy called an argument from ignorance.
Right.
And yet I submit to you that that's how the paranormal is being promoted. So the people will call me up and say, well, what was I remember when reporters did this years ago when the Phoenix Lights had first appeared. And a disc jockey in Phoenix calls me up and tells me, have you heard about these lights? And he describes them and everything. He says, what were they? And I said, I don't know. And it's sort of like, well, see? No, not see anything. I said, we just don't know what they were. I suspect that soon we will know. And, of course, we do now know what they were. But it's an argument from ignorance. So the paranormal is promising big things and is kind of getting by with a very low standard of evidence, and hope springs eternal. And I think the media then is seized on this as something they can sell. Look at that TV series, and I don't mean to pick on any one series particularly, but look at the series, I think it's now in its fifth season, Finding Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. My goodness. They don't seem to be able to find Bigfoot at all. We don't have a Bigfoot after 5 years. What are they doing? Well, they're out at night with pretty much the same equipment the ghost hunters are using, because they're just copying the ghost hunter shows, and they're breathlessly saying at every possible, did you hear that? It's just really kind of incredible that they can get by with that, that they can have a show season after season with case after case in which all they're really doing is mostly running around at night in the dark with some glitch-prone equipment and trying to convince people that they're just on the verge of catching a furry monster. And further to your question, Bigfoot, for example, if you went back in time, there was a point at which it might have seemed very reasonable, I know it did to me in my youth, that there might be a hitherto unknown creature in the vast reaches of, say, British Columbia or the Himalayas. But what we're having now is more and more and more Bigfoot cases. They're everywhere. They're in parking lots in New Jersey. A lot more Bigfoot cases than we ever dreamed of. They're everywhere, and yet we still can't find them. Except I think I've found what Bigfoot really is.
And Joe, I completely agree with you. I think that and I'm not just basing it off of what's on television. I've physically seen, many quote-unquote teams out there that claim to be investigating the paranormal, whether it be Bigfoot or UFOs or ghosts and spirits. And, they go about it the wrong way or not even a way at all. It's just, like you said, just wandering around in the dark, calling out and, holding out their flashlight.
Right.
But could you say that, and just going back to what you had just talked about earlier about the comment about, investigating haunted houses, you've done so many of them, and then, what's the point of really going to the next haunted house when all the other previous ones, you really never caught anything. There was no inkling of evidence of any ghosts. Could you say the same thing about, what NASA is doing about finding life on other planets? We've never found anything so far.
No, I would not, because it's a really whole different situation. I mean, looking for ghosts on this planet is a pretty finite set of territory. I mean, we've got the haunted houses. We can go right there. We've got the people who've seen the ghosts, or we have the ghostly phenomena. It's eminently investigatable, I think. It's just that it doesn't turn up a ghost. The same could be said for Bigfoot. We've certainly the North American Bigfoot is seeming very, very, very unlikely that at this late date, after finding no fossil evidence, not a single carcass, no evidence really of any kind, seems like that's really not very likely. On the other hand, I persist, and as I've said, if people are interested in these things, then I'm going to be interested, and I'm going to be interested maybe for other reasons. I'm not expecting to catch the ghost or the Bigfoot, but I'm interested in why you are persisting in going out. What is it that motivates you? What is it motivates a prankster to pull a prank? Is he trying to feel superior to someone else, or what's he doing? Why are people fooled by illusions like, say, just a common one, when people see a long-necked, multi-humped, undulating serpentine lake monster, and certainly sometimes at least, I know this for a fact, are seeing otters swimming in a line. And that undulating serpentine look of 2 or 3 or 4 creatures is actually looks like one big snake-like monster, but it's not. So I'm thinking that there is value to investigating the paranormal because of the things we learn about our world and ourselves. And I could go on more about that if you want. But when you talk about looking out into the galaxy and beyond, that's a whole different order of magnitude. So I mean, people are always asking me as if I would know any more than anybody else. What do I think about life out there? And the answer is, and I say to people, listen to me carefully and read my lips. No one knows. They'll tell you this is likely or it's unlikely or this is, but they don't know. And it matters. We want to know, so we keep looking. My friends at SETI are, as we speak, are searching the heavens for signals that may come from extraterrestrials. I'm never really against people looking for anything, including, by all means, look for Bigfoot or ghosts, but I would just prefer that people do things in a more, do more sensible looking in a more sensible way and try to explain what's happening fairly rather than just try to gather more bad evidence to keep hope alive.
Definitely. I agree with you on that. You know, Luci and I interviewed Eric Walter, who's the director of a documentary called My Amityville Horror. And I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary, but he focused the film directly on one of the children, the older brother, and his sort of not so vocal child, Danny Lutz. And he lived in that house as a child. And Luci and I actually have talked to Danny as well. And it seems as though he's been affected by something. He has a very strange character and personality, but he I hate to say it, but he doesn't appear to be sane 100% of the time. Whether that's a mental thing or a paranormal thing is another story, but we can both say that something affected him. What have you concluded about the Amityville case?
Well, I knew the Cromartys who lived in the house later, and knew Barbara Cromarty and talked to her about these matters quite a bit. When I first came upon the Amityville horror, I was taken by when I read Jay Enson's book, and I was taken by the fact that this didn't seem like most hauntings that I knew about. Most hauntings that I knew were, some typical sort of things that you would associate with a haunted house. Or another genre, if you will, would be a poltergeist case. Or there were cases that were in the sort of demonic class. These were fairly distinct things, but Amityville seemed to be a hodgepodge of all of these in a way that sounded very suspicious to me. It sounded like if I asked you to make up a haunted house for Hollywood, you would put in a little of everything to make it really, really busy and intriguing. And that's what it looked like to me. As I proceeded to look further, I found I knew from Barbara Cromarty, for example, that if you remember a door was twisted off its hinges, and there were windows with similar damage. That never happened. Let me repeat that. That never happened. Those bits of hardware on all the windows and doors were still old and intact and had the old varnish on them. It never, ever happened. No locksmiths or repairmen were ever called to the house. For heaven's sakes, the police were never called to the house. So we've got a bunch of lies. The devil's tracks in the snow that were in the book, there was no snow on the ground on that date. So this story began to fall apart, and I was just one of many people, putting out and sharing some of the findings. But to make a long story short, we now know that the attorney, William Weber, who was an attorney for Ronald DeFeo, who had murdered his parents and siblings in that house, that we have the testimony of William Weber that George and Kathy Lutz sat in his law office and over several bottles of wine made up the horror story. And I don't think to this day the public is quite aware of that, but it's a matter of record. It ended up being a matter that went to trial and so forth. The Lutzes sued for, because they couldn't have a moment's peace in the house, and this Amityville fraud had really ruined their domestic tranquility. And so I know people come in with other ideas about Amityville, like, well, what if there was some mysterious auric connection to that particular house? Or people just pull this stuff, like picking fruit off a tree or something, and has no basis in the reality of the situation. But if you investigate from the ground up, that's not what you don't find these fanciful theories. What you find is that this was a made-up story. So I know who you're talking about, and I know he's an odd guy. I don't know whether he's really knows what happened or is looking for publicity or has now developed a lot of false memories. I have no idea, nor do I think we need to worry an awful lot about that. What we need to understand is this story was made up by Weber and the Lutzes. Weber's motivation was that if he could convince the world that this house was demon-possessed, he could then perhaps get a new trial for his client saying the demons made me do this, you see. And George and Kathy, as far as I can tell, were looking for, a book deal. And this began sort of a series. There were a number of these kinds of cases, and one of the suspicious circumstances was that Ed and Lorraine Warren were involved in many of these cases, and the Warrens had this wonderful habit and ability of calling themselves demonologists, and they would go to some house, almost always, I think, a Catholic family, who was having some haunting trouble, and it could be anything. Maybe they were hearing a noise or something. But pretty soon, Ed and Lorraine had convinced these people that these were demons and their house was possessed by demons. And pretty soon they were talking a book deal and so forth. And we now know from some of the ghostwriters, pun intended, but some of the ghostwriters who wrote these books for the Warrens, that they were encouraged to just make up stuff. And these all ended up being famous movies, Haunting in Connecticut and others. And people to this day think they go see the movie and they say, well, it's based on a true story. This is all real that I'm seeing. Look at that person levitate. Just totally naively unaware of what's actually happened. And I've investigated a number of these and actually appeared on a TV show with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I found Ed to be a bullying guy who swore like a sailor off camera, and I had about zero respect for him.
Wow. I'm sorry, dear. In preparation for the show, I did listen to a lot of your interviews, and you spoke about some of your previous cases, like Roswell. We mentioned the Shroud of Turin, and even the visions of Fatima, and your conclusions of why it wasn't true. And I actually found myself saying, yeah, you know what? This makes total sense. Why didn't I see that? So my question to you is, why do you think believers don't see the true facts?
Well, I think, as I sort of suggested a little bit earlier, I think that when you're let's just take a typical true believer who's, believes that Fatima was a miracle from God. And if listeners are not aware what Fatima was, that was in Fatima, Portugal, about 17, something like that. And some children had been in touch with the Virgin Mary, and particularly a little girl named Lucia was just this fantasy-prone, charismatic child who just made up stuff and told spellbinding stories, and got crowds of people out looking to the skies. And then she said at one important and dramatic moment, she said, "Look, the sun." And something happened. People did stare at the sun, and we get these reports that the sun danced in the sky, the sun pulsated, it came down closer to them and then backed off, moved back and forth in that way, or danced around, made movements and so forth. And let me just say that we know for a fact that none of that happened, actually, because the same sun that was over Fatima, you see, was over Paris and all these other places. Never happened. If the sun had done any such gyrations, astronomers would have known about it. In fact, it would have wreaked havoc with the planet Earth. It would have perhaps wiped us out if the sun had done that sort of thing. So, and yet, people had experiences or illusions. I think these were retinal effects. I think that if you try to stare at something that bright and your eyes sort of try and retreat, could create one set of movements. And if you darted your eyes back and forth, could create maybe a dancing effect. I've speculated about this at some length. But when you're talking to someone, particularly someone who experienced something like that, they're going to say, well, I know what I saw. And you weren't there and you didn't see it. Well, okay, but see, in a way, they seem like they're in a better position to know what happened than you are, but that's not the case, because they went there as devout believers. They were fooled by an illusion. They were tricked by their own willingness to believe, and so on. And so if you're trying to explain rationally, as I'm doing right now, to such a person, you're just like ships passing in the night. You're just not on the same wavelength. You can talk. I've realized this many times talking to someone who's had an experience, and you're just not on the same wavelength. They're emoting and telling you something that they say over and over. I know what I saw. Actually, they don't. They know what they think they saw. Now, that's a big difference. But so what I'm trying to do is, of course, is bridge that gap by realizing I too can be fooled. I too have had occasional experiences that puzzled me for a moment, and I try to work hard to get on the same wavelength with the believer so that I can try to understand what they're saying and the way in which they're feeling it. And I'm not always successful in trying to convince them, but that, I am able quite often to go, leaving them still believing, to go and explain to others what probably happened. And I have to content myself with that. I don't feel it's my job to wrestle people to the ground and make them see the same way I do, but I do usually try to explain to people and hope they'll get it. A funny little anecdote that comes to my mind about that was at Campbell, Ohio. The glowing statues that were way up on a bell tower at the church, and they were just had some gold leaf on portions of the statues, and the gold leaf was shining in the sun. But when I pointed this out, and the priest agreed with me and the bishop agreed, we had no disagreement at all, but the pilgrims that were coming there were believers, and one of them said to me, but if you come back tonight, you'll see that the sun has nothing to do with it, and it will still glow. So, of course, I came back, and it was just, again, it was shining from ambient lights, from parking lot lights and street lights. But this is the point I was going to make. The next day, I was taking some final photographs and notes, and this very nice church lady that I'd said hello to a few times coming and going to work in the church, and she came by and she said, well, Mr. Skeptic, what have you found? And I explained it briefly to her, and she smiled and said very cheerily, well, I prefer not to believe that, and went on in the church. And I just left me laughing because, of course, that's her prerogative. She doesn't have to listen to me. But that I think, is kind of in essence what's happening in a lot of these cases. People are so anxious to believe, and unless you've had one of these people really just shrieking at you, I've had them call me and threaten me, or just, almost hysterical. Some of the UFO people just, almost hysterical and threatening and swearing and so forth, because, and that's your proof that you see that they're operating on an emotional wavelength and are not able to have a rational discussion.
Well, Joe, you've made a career out of searching for the truth. And as we've seen, the truth isn't always what the believers want to hear. And in order to believe something is the truth, you have said that you need to see the evidence. Has there been any case where you did not find a logical explanation?
That's my most asked question. It is a very good question, and I guess it is It is just an essential question because I'm asked that, all the time. And the best way I can answer it is this, I think, is first of all, remember that even if I couldn't explain it, wouldn't infer that it was therefore paranormal, because it would be an argument from ignorance. But in the spirit in which that question is asked, I have to say, basically no. I haven't found a case, except I have to qualify it. Yes, I've had many cases where someone will say, it was 1969 and I was in Peoria and I saw this light. What was it? Well, of course I have no idea, nor should I. Why on earth, why would I? There's no evidence, zero evidence. We have someone who's now told this story for so long, it probably bears little resemblance to what actually occurred. If he was fooled by an illusion, that's not gone away. So why should I know what he thought he saw? So in that sense, yes, there are many cases that go unexplained because we just don't have any evidence. But where I've had a fair chance where I could get my hands on some evidence, where I could go somewhere and maybe the phenomenon would happen in my presence, I like to think that I've generally been able to come up with at least a plausible explanation. One of the things that I aim for is to use Occam's razor, the principle that we should look at various hypotheses that might explain something, and the one that we should prefer is the one that makes the fewest assumptions. So if we have to assume that, and then a spaceship came from another planet and blah, blah. No, if we don't have to assume that, if we could just assume that something simpler happened, that would be what I like to call the preferred hypothesis. If we can explain with a very simple few things that we know are real, and we don't have to bring in paranormal or supernatural. So I try to do that. People try to attack my suggestions, and sometimes they're just that. I said, well, I think, that this Bigfoot case was really an upright standing bear, and people will explain why it couldn't have been a bear and so forth. But they can't, here are the rules, I think. You can't just not like my explanation. You actually have to move mine out of the way by a better one. And you can't cheat by saying, well, see, it was really a Bigfoot. See, that's cheating because we don't know that Bigfoot exists. It's just an assumption. So maybe that clarifies a little bit.
Well, you know what, Joe? It's become laughable when I watch a paranormal TV show today. I totally get that it's all for hype and it's all for ratings, but you know what? People tend to believe more of what's on television than what real life is. Do you have any advice for those people who pray to the Ghost Adventures gods?
Say that again.
Do you have any advice for those people who pray to the Ghost Adventures gods?
Well, it's hard to say how I can advise people other than, number one, the truth is something. I don't claim to have a corner on the market. I don't claim to be in possession of, the truth is a pretty big thing. I'm certainly looking for the truth, and I'm trying to find what's most likely the truth. And that's a choice. You have to decide that's what you want. And if you don't want that, if you'd rather believe a fantasy, then right off we're on a different wavelength. Once you really want to find out what's actually happening and willing to say, if it's something simple or something, real world, I'm happy to accept that, then I think we're probably not too far apart. And that's why some Bigfooters and some ghost hunters and I get along well, because we're both out there, unlike the armchair skeptics or the people who only watch these silly TV shows. Those of us that are really out looking and those of us who really care and there are some on both sides. We may be have a fence between us, but we're on opposite sides of a fence and can talk. And that's what I'm hoping for as we go forward.
Is there a paranormal case or a religious case that you're dying to take on and investigate?
Well, there are lots. I don't like to speculate on such things publicly in advance of looking, because then I find that people start trying to get ahead of me and fuss with the evidence and so forth. Better that I just show up when I feel like it, unannounced and so on. But sure, I'm increasingly looking at a lot of cold cases because, while on the one hand, the cold case, in the same way, that we'll have an unsolved homicide, an old paranormal case that was never really quite resolved. And for the same reasons that those paranormal cold cases are of interest to us, we actually can attempt to go back in our time machine, as it were, go back and get newspaper files, find out what was said originally. Maybe there's an affidavit or something. It's true that a lot of evidence is probably lost, and we're not going to be able to, the haunted house may be long gone and so forth. But on the happy side, the dust has settled, and things are not in flux the way they are in a brand new case, not changing daily, perhaps, like they were at Amityville. So you actually have kind of a finite amount of things, bits of evidence, and you could go back and say, when you read between the lines here, and it looks like in this case there's a little girl that was there when all the poltergeist activity happened. She was in the room. She was the last one seen here. She was maybe that's what happened, is these are pranks of a little girl, and maybe you have some further evidence. Maybe she was caught once, and that would be enough for me to say, well, that's probably she was then doing all those things. And so some of the cold cases are, bear fruit if we go back and look at them, and I'm doing that in a lot of cases.
Well, on the flip side of this, is there a case that you regret ever investigating? No, not really. I guess the Shroud of Turin has caused me more grief because I've really had a lot of very angry people, and in some cases a lot of real dishonesty about the evidence from the Shroudies. You would think that a reasonable person would think that if the Shroud of Turin is contrary to the gospel record and Jewish burial practice, there was no history for it for 1,300 years. The earliest record was a bishop's report that the forger confessed that the blood was still bright red, unlike ordinary blood, that the forensic serologists found that the blood was actually tempera paint, and that the radiocarbon dating by 3 different laboratories dated the shroud cloth to, yes, you guessed it, the time of the forger's confession. Wouldn't you think that would do it for most truth seekers? But you see, what's happening is these are not truth seekers. As one of the Shroudies told me once, she said, you're missing the point. And I said, well, I hope not. No, she said, you're missing the point. The point isn't whether the shroud's genuine or not. And I said, well, you got me there, because that's what I think is the point. She said, no, it's whether if we can make people believe it's genuine, we can lead them to the true religion. And I said, madam, you frighten me. So, but that one's caused me a great deal of grief in that, no amount of work that I've done, and it's caused an immense amount of work, out of all proportion to how great a mystery it was. Yes, it had some mysterious elements, and yes, it deserved a thorough look at it, and yes, we did that. My book, Inquest on the Shroud of Turin, for those who want to read it. But it pretty much doesn't matter what evidence you find, they're not going to believe it. And they've got, pseudoscientists and others just, as we speak, cranking out more false claims that'll be shown next Easter. Right.
But sometime I'll tell you what I really think about the shroud.
Okay, Joe, here's the big question of the night. What if tomorrow all the news outlets came on air, they said there's been a mass sighting of spirits and ghosts all around the world, and they're communicating with us and about various things? What would you think?
Well, that would, you see, I just don't think I should buy into that kind of elaborate, far-fetched hypothetical, because it's just not going to happen. And, I mean, it's just out of all proportion. Where were these ghosts all these centuries now? We haven't found one. What would have suddenly changed? I mean, it would just, I would think that if this happened, something like that happened, certainly we've had some little kinds of bouts of that. You know, there was once the Fox sisters, who I call the Foxy sisters, began modern spiritualism in the late 1840s. Like wildfire, it spread all over the country and all over Europe and so forth, and in Australia. But what was happening was a contagious phenomenon in which other people got on the bandwagon, and other tricksters produced phenomena, and people fooled themselves, and so on. And that's the answer to that. It wasn't that there were suddenly all these ghosts had come out of the woodwork. And I think sometimes we do need to look at not just one case. When I first started, McKinsey House was my first maybe really big case. And I thought, this is how you do it. You go on site and you investigate, and don't ask me about all haunted houses. Just ask me about this one or that one. And I can tell you about the ones I've investigated. Don't ask me about others, because I don't have opinions about them. I think that was the correct approach, the case-by-case approach that I used for 40-some years. But now I am beginning to put things together and look for patterns and so forth. And I think I've earned the right to do that now, and I find that's useful. And so we can look at a whole phenomenon now, and we can look at the parts of it and come to a better understanding than we can just this case, that case, another case, that we can look at some common parallels and begin to think, what is Bigfoot? And as I've suggested, maybe of all the creatures in North America, the one that looks most like Bigfoot is what I call the Bigfoot bear, the upright standing bear. And it's amazing how often you go back and read these cases, sometimes 100 years old, and you can see that people are described that they weren't aware that bears stood on their hind legs, or that bears, they say, well, these are only bears here are black bears, and this was cinnamon colored. And they're just not aware of color phases of bears or the different genetic variants and so forth. We're now more knowledgeable about that, and we know that people can be absolutely fooled by an illusion of. So if it looks like a bear, acts like a bear, picking berries, say, and is found in bear territory, dare I suggest humbly that it might be a bear, without people shouting invective at me? You know, wouldn't that be nice? But no, they have to caricature and make fun and so forth. Well, okay.
Joe, it's been an amazing conversation. We are so glad that we got to talk to you. Is there something that you want to leave our listeners to think about or remember about your work and your theories?
You mean other than urge them, please, to buy all my books? Well, okay. Other than that, the old saying, keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out, is still a good one. Don't decide that you believe or disbelieve in advance of inquiry, but dare to go out and dare to prioritize your possible explanations, call them hypotheses, and look for evidence that might corroborate them. And don't fall for the trap of negative evidence and say, we couldn't explain it any other way, so this one's really a ghost. Don't fall for that trap, because no scientist will give you the time of day for it.
Right.
So, Joe, do you have any cases or projects coming up that you can tell us about?
No. I just find, it's too bad, but I for example, once I told some college kids a ghost case I was working on. What do you think they did? They went to the haunted house and told the curator everything that I told them and what my thinking was. So it was just totally pretty much ruined my being able to get any more secrets out of the place. And another time I was very open with some people in an area that where I was investigating something, and don't you know that almost before I got home and could write an article, 2 articles appeared using, of course, my ideas in local publications. I was furious. I just consider that, theft. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's funny or okay, but it's just as soon as I say what I'm working on, I've seen people try to beat me there, or somehow get ahead of me in doing something, or warn somebody. The notorious skeptic Joe Nickell is coming your way. Watch out. He may be wearing a disguise, and so on. I mean, it's just not to my advantage.
Yeah.
To talk in advance of doing. Why would I?
Understood.
I
Joe,
mean, I can be, I hope, as entertaining by telling what I have done, as opposed to speculating when maybe any speculation would be just totally wrong. So why even start there?
Right,
mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, Joe, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and your cases?
Well, you can go online, and it helps if you spell my name correctly, Nickell, and I just say accept no imitations. And you can Google search. I have a website, joenickell.com. I've got a blog site. Just look at some of the things I've done. You can try typing my name and maybe your favorite case. Maybe I'll show up. Not that every Wikipedia entry gives me the credit I deserve. I've had people try to relegate my serious work for maybe a 2 or 3 year period where I really worked, relegated to a footnote, and Johnny-come-latelys giving their opinion about it, based almost entirely on having read one of my books. I find that offensive again, but anyway, look out there. You'll be able to find some of my cases and look at them, and you can make up your own mind.
Well, thank you, Joe, for coming on the show. We're going to put a link to all of your outlets on our Facebook page so that everybody can check it out, and links to where they can find your books as well. Again, we appreciate.
How much will I have to pay you to do that?
Nothing.
Let me ask you this. No, let me ask you this. Do you take wooden nickels?
Yes, we do, and I've seen your wooden nickels. I know.
Well,
They're
I have
amazing.
A lot of fun because when I give them out in person, of course, they do magical things. I have fun with that.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for
so much.
having me. I've had a really good time. You've given me a fair hearing, and I don't think called me a bad name once.
Absolutely not. We don't intend to.
Okay. I've had a
Thanks,
good time.
Joe.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You, Joe.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So there you have it, Joe Nickell, the notorious Joe Nickell, the notorious skeptic Joe Nickell.
Mm-hmm.
Lucy, what was your motive for having Joe on the show?
You know what? Just to see what it is, to examine the mindset. Because here you have a person, and everything that I read and everything that I saw about him, everything is so black and white. Here's a person that truly fits my description of a skeptic. If the evidence is not there, therefore it does not exist. And some things that he that he went through, some of the things, the cases that I read about, they did make sense. He pointed out a lot of little things that I never saw before, that I never thought about before. but it didn't change my perception of what the case was about. I wanted to hear it from him. I wanted to see what the mindset is like. And just this conversation with him, I see a very black and white world. This is this is that. And if it doesn't fit in either one, then therefore it doesn't fit. It's not there. I don't know. I don't really agree with a lot of things, the way he looks at them, but I do agree with some things, you know. I mean, I do agree that you know, as investigators, I think a lot of us, we go into places and we're so conditioned from media, from TV, from watching the ghost hunting shows, that when we hear something, we immediately say, oh, this is it, without going through that extra step. I think Joe has taken that to the extreme. I think you need to do that, but you also need to keep an open mind that there's possibly something out there that we just don't know about. That's what the paranormal is. It's not just all science. I think science has a lot to do with it. You can use science to try to prove things, but I just happen to think that the paranormal is just something that is just outside the scientific reach.
Well, the argument is, can the paranormal be proven, scientifically? No, it cannot be. At this point in time, it cannot be. Now, that's not to say that in my world that it won't be in the near future or in the future. I think, and just to my point when I talked to Joe earlier, and I brought up the question about the astrophysicists and the astronomers, if I can talk right tonight, that they just the other day actually, this week, just recently discovered that the universe is expanding much faster than what they originally thought. And so that meant the speed of that expansion is determining the years and the length of time that it took for us to get where we are at this moment in time. And so therefore, where they're putting the actual point of birth of the universe quite possibly now may be different. So look for that going forward in the future, guys. That this whole 14.4 billion or 13.8 billion, whatever that number is, that's going around now as far as the number of years that we've been the universe has been alive, basically, may be changing. And so, if science is able to redirect its guide, its direction, its theories, based on new evidence and new knowledge of things, who's to say that in the future, what they perceived as non-existent, either that being paranormal or anything in the world, it could be paranormal or non-paranormal, how could they for sure say that there is a 100% certainty that it is definite, whether yes or no? I don't feel that they can at this point. I think that here's a number for everyone to understand. The amount of knowledge that we understand about our lives and the world around us and the universe that we live in is not 50%. We don't know 50% of the universe and what it entails. We don't know 30%. We don't know 10%. We don't know 5%. We don't even know 1%. We know 0.01% of the universe. Let that sink in for a second. How can you then say that you are 100% definite that you know what there is and what there isn't? And that's sort of where my point is. I completely agree with Joe with the bones of the basis for his theories, that you need to have knowledge, you need to do research, you need to do hard investigating, you need to get out there, you need to put all the variables on the table. You can't just go according to what just Luci just said, because the television show said it was haunted, or 5 other paranormal groups said it was haunted, that it's haunted. You can't go into investigating or being a paranormal team by thinking that way. That's not a true paranormal investigator. You have to. And if it is not haunted, then it's not haunted. Don't try and make it to be. Not everything is haunted, or not everything is clearly haunted. I personally believe that there are spirits all over. It doesn't have to be in a certain location. But the facts of the experience may not be true in certain locations. And so a person's experience may not have happened that way. Even though that place may be haunted, that person's experience may not have happened that way. And so there's nothing to corroborate or provide evidence for. I was intrigued when I brought up then the question about if people have said to him that he's investigated so many haunted houses in the past, and he has not once found any evidence for paranormal, for ghosts or spirits. So why do you need to go to another haunted house? And his response was, yeah, I know. It's going to be no again. The answer is going to be no again. He's already preceding his thoughts and the way that the investigation is going to go based on previous experience, which is a scientific thought. It's a theory. That's the way that science rules. And so that's fine. But when I flipped it and talked about the question about, okay, well, we have not found life on other planets, but yet NASA and science is heavily in the universe right now looking for life on other planets, and they continually do. For years and years have been out there looking for it, but not once has found anything or any life on other planets. Should we just stop? If we've hopped on every planet or every moon or every piece or every part of the galaxy within our world, or in universe within our world, should we stop because we have not? Is it truth to say that, okay, if we then go to Saturn, we're not going to find a life on that planet because I haven't found life before? And he thought it was absurd. He pretty much thought that idea was absurd because it has no relevance to the paranormal, which I kind of disagree with, but I get where he's going at, and I understand. But his underlying thought and what he had said was, well, no one really knows what's out there, and so they're going to continue. Well, I can say the same thing about the paranormal. No one really knows yet whether the paranormal exists. And so I'm going to continue searching. And he agrees, keep investigating, keep looking out there for things. So, I'm gonna do that. But there are things that I did not agree with Joe on for obvious reasons. But I do understand where he's coming from. And that's the whole point of what I wanted to get from the show, was the understanding of how a person like Joe works and conducts his business and thinks and acts and, conversates. And so, I thought it was a great opportunity to talk to someone from quote-unquote the other side. And, I can learn something. I can learn something from Joe that I may not be able to learn from a fellow investigator because, their mindset is completely different than what Joe thinks. And so I may, take a lot of the things that Joe talks about on his talks and in his books and such. And so I found it really interesting tonight.
Well, you know what? He's, in my mind, he is the scientific side. You know how we always talk about, like, science doesn't always go hand in hand with the paranormal. Joe, to me, is that embodiment of science. Science, you have to have your evidence before you can make your determination. But to investigate the paranormal, we don't have the facts. We don't have everything. So therefore, we're gathering all this stuff together, but the things that we gather may end up someday being the pieces that solve the puzzle. But if we were just to stop, if we kept going, oh, well, we didn't get a ghost here, and we didn't get a ghost here, and we didn't get a ghost here. Okay, let's stop. So that ends the possibility of finding an answer. And the paranormal is so huge and so vast and so unknown, we can't stop. We can't stop looking for that answer, because that one thing that's going to happen to somebody, and it's not going to happen to every single person, may be the answer that solves this big puzzle. It may be. It may not be. We may be investigating for the rest of our lives on this planet and never find a thing. But let's just say, what if? It's not so much. I get the feeling from Joe. It's like, okay, boom, this is it. It does not fit in this box, so therefore it is not a square. Okay, so what if it's a circle? The circle might fit inside that box, or maybe the circle needs a completely different container. It's having the open mind. And, he's a very pleasant person. I spoke with him a couple times prior to the show. Very pleasant person. Very great conversation. But I don't agree with the, that line in the sand. If this is it, this is the line in the sand, and this is where it ends. I personally believe that there is something on the other side of that line, and that's what keeps me investigating, and I think that's what keeps all of us investigating.
Well, I feel bad for him, because I'm sure he gets, and he mentioned it, a lot of negative feedback from people. When you attack, first of all, when you attack religious sectors and religious groups, you are taking on the world when you do that. And so when you start to talk about miracles are nothing, that they are just your imagination, when crying, Mary statues are nothing, when the Shroud of Turin is a hoax, when all of these relics and things that, many of the religions have believed for and not have based their religion on, but have sort of preceded their beliefs. Many of the fellows and followers and parishioners really take those things to heart, and it's to them that's sort of the evidence that they feel justifies their belief system. And when you start to do that, when you start to take away people's belief system, especially in the idea of where they're going when they die, that there is not going to be this heaven, because now you have just, destroyed what they have believed in for their entire life and what their family and ancestors have believed in for centuries. They're going to get very angry. You're taking away their eternal life. You are taking away what has been, like I've talked about this before, what is their blanket and what has been their blanket for so long. And it's sort of the same way with paranormal groups. When you take away the idea that the paranormal does not exist, it feeds into the idea that there is no afterlife, that there is no sense in believing in something that does not exist. When you die, you die. It's black. And so for many people who are within the paranormal, that's scary as well. Now, for myself, I've mentioned this before, I've been fighting, and I think I've won the battle, with religion in my life. I don't believe in a instituted religion. I don't have that fundamental basis of belief in religion. But I do believe in the paranormal, and that's sort of an oxymoron to a lot of people, especially to skeptics out there. How can you not believe in religion, but then you believe in the paranormal? Well, for me, the paranormal, I believe, is all about energy, and it has to do with the things of the unknown that we are unaware of, and I can't really explain it. But to me, it has nothing to do with the man in the sky. It has nothing to do with a god or gods or anything like that. I believe it has something to do with energy and light and your consciousness. And so, to me, I have my own internal battle, and it's sort of like I'm playing on both sides. So, who the hell is really going to listen to me in a debate? And I get it. Nobody will. I don't expect to, and that's why I don't have debates, because I can't. I can't fight it. But I respect people like Joe Nickell. I respect people like J.D. Eberhard or Matt Dillahunty, and those folks who, yes, they are fundamentally atheists, but they have an understanding and they have a belief in what they believe, whether it's believing in the idea of not believing, or it's in the belief that what they understand is true. And so goes it with the paranormal side. We know, and those of you who are listening and watching, know that you have had experiences. We're not on another level. We're not in a loony bin. We're not in a padded cell with a straitjacket on. We know what we've experienced. I know what I've experienced. I have many, many times. In the chat room, there are a bunch of different folks that were bringing up questions which I thought were really valid, like, have them explain what an EVP is, and, how can you not understand that voices and words and sentences are being recorded where nothing is there? How do you explain that to a skeptic? To me, I think you'd go in circles. It would be a never-ending argument, and you wouldn't get anywhere. It's just like the skeptic trying to tell me that the paranormal is nothing. It's non-existent. Kind of stupid, because I believe it. And so for me to try and explain to him and try to get him to be on my side, or anyone on my side, it's futile. It's a waste of your energy. It's an exhaustion that you don't need. And so I think just communicating with folks like Joe Nickell, just having conversations with Joe, intelligent, legitimate, non-argumentative conversations with skeptics out there is healthy. And I think that's what this community, this paranormal group and field needs more of. A lot of times we like to shun and push away people who have the ideology like Joe because it doesn't agree with us. I can understand that, but sit down, break bread, have coffee, and find out what they think. You may not agree with them, and they're not going to agree with you, but at least you have an understanding of where they stand. And there are things that you can possibly learn from them. And who's to say that when you leave that conversation, that skeptic may not have a resonating voice in their head of you talking about a certain story that they may not be able to forget and may be embedded in them for a while. And even though they may not turn around the next day or the week later, who knows? They could turn around a year or two, 10 years later. But that's not your mission. But it's an idea that you can leave and saying, you know what, I've said my piece. I'm happy. I was able to communicate my experience to someone else. Whether they believe me or not, it shouldn't matter to anybody.
Well, yeah, exactly what you said. I mean, it goes both ways, okay? A skeptic has their ideas talking. I guess that's what I wanted to do. By inviting Joe to come on, I wanted to have that conversation. Because how many times do you come across people in the paranormal community and they down the skeptics? They're it's like, oh, well, they don't believe. Well, that's fine. They don't believe. But until you have a conversation with that person, you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what they're thinking. And in order to have a conversation, you get a little bit of insight into that. You get to see what they're thinking. In exchange, they get to see what you're thinking. Now, if they're a skeptic and they totally, discount what you believe or what you put forth as a experience, that's fine. But it doesn't mean that you have to bash them. You have to put them down for what they believe. That's their belief. Okay? personally, I do believe that, our energy moves on. I believe it. I totally believe that we have past lives. I mean, last week, to me, was proof of it. And I don't want to get into a religious debate, but, when I read about atheists and I talk to them, it's almost like, okay, so you believe that once this body ends, that's it. It's over. I want to understand that, because to me that is such a foreign idea. It makes no sense to me. Every ounce of my energy screams that we will continue, that we've been here. I don't know where it originated. I don't know how it began, but I do know that this energy was there before. This is my belief. My energy screams that it will continue. Once this body ends, it's going to move forward. So I want to understand how an atheist thinks, because to me, and I don't want to say that I pity them, but I feel bad for them, because it's like, okay, so if everything ends right then and there, that's it, then that's just, I don't know, it just seems so final and so foreign to me. It's like if you hadn't lived your life every single day to the fullest and you die, well, you missed the boat. That's it. Boom. And I don't believe it's like that. I believe every day starts something new, and that energy continues. And okay, so maybe I didn't get this life right. Maybe I'll get it right in the next one. Maybe it'll take me a few more to get it right until I reach enlightenment. Once I get there, then I think maybe that's where it needs to be. But a skeptic, sometimes, because everything, science has to have all these rules and everything. I believe life, I believe the universe is more than just rules. There's something else greater than all of us that doesn't fall into a category, that doesn't fall into rules and regulations. And that's what makes it so beautiful. And that's what keeps me investigating. That's what keeps me asking questions. But in the meantime, I do need to talk to someone like Joe. I have to understand where they're coming from. And I understand the scientific way of looking at things. I get it. I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand. I understand how you have to. And even those little things, investigators going into, buildings with the flashlight and running around and let's look for ghosts and stuff. It's more
which is what we do. On the fundamental bottom line is what we do, really.
Yeah, we do that. But how do I put this? It's not just that. It's also the feelings. It's also communicating. It's, I can't explain. I've been touched in almost every single location that we've been. Okay? And if you look at it logically, there's nobody around. I don't have any nervous conditions that I feel stuff, or I don't have any something like that. But yet I have been touched. I have felt the pressure of a hand on me. Now, I can honestly also say that I've never really had a truly negative experience, and I read about people that say, that they have absolutely negative experiences. I don't think I've ever really had one. I don't have any experience that I can define as negative. So what is the difference? It can't just be the things that I truly believe. There's got to be something there. I don't know. Now, I do agree with him to a point. You do have to use logic. You do have to use reason. And the whole thing about the reality TV shows. I can't tell you how many people, and I read and I see posts, and because someone is on a television show, they treat them like they're absolute gods, that they can do no wrong. Oh, I love so-and-so, why? Do you know this person? Have you ever investigated with them? Have you truly sat down with them and had a conversation? No, you just see them on TV. So because they're on TV, you believe everything.
It's a fascination, just like, the Justin Biebers and the Lady Gagas, or, whoever. It's, the fanfare. It was with the Beatles. It was with Elvis. It's just the, oh my God, they are my life. And so to someone within the paranormal, those shows are their lives. There are many people who are not able, financially or for whatever reason, not able to investigate, and so they live through the people on the shows. And I get it. I understand completely. But I think what you're trying to get at is the idea that, think more rationally, and there's a trend that we normally see on a lot of these shows that lean towards the demonic and the evil, and if it's not just on television, but it's on the internet. People are fascinated with that. We've had a show on this. People want to be scared. They love to be scared. I love to be scared, and so we gravitate toward things like that, and we click on that video or we watch that show. It's all for the ratings. It's all for the hype, but there are people who don't do the research, who are not knowledgeable of the fact that that's not the entire life of the paranormal, demonic and evil and all those sorts. And so they tend to believe it, and they get a wrong perception of things. I blame the media. I don't blame the person. I blame the media. And so that needs to change. And that's one of the basis and one of the biggest reasons why Luci and I do this show is to try and educate people into thinking otherwise, into opening our minds, even though they are open already, opening our minds a little bit more to the understanding that there are things in this world that are unexplainable, but yet are not evil and demonic, that we can search out for those things and figure it out, or try to figure it out.
Well, yeah. I mean, the one thing that really gets to me is, the fascination with the dark, the fascination with demons. Everything is demonic. Everything it's a dark, negative entity. I truly believe that if you're a crabby person on this side, you're probably going to be a crabby person on the other side. Doesn't make you a demon, even though some people might argue that, but it doesn't make sense to me, and I truly believe that if you do come across something truly negative, because I believe there is negative energy, you're going to know it. And it's not going to be somebody just scratching you. It's going to be something really horrible. But I think because of the media, because of television, because of stories that we see, posts on the internet, we want to believe that everything, there are demons out there and they are negative and they are going to, send us to hell. I don't even know if there's hell. I believe we live in hell right now. I mean, come on, I live in Chicago.
I go to hell every work day. But I want to put you on the chair right now.
Oh, here we go.
That's right. Here we go. Okay.
Go for it.
If you guys remember, were listening, I think it was a couple of shows ago. I don't remember what the show was, but we had Noah Tysick had called in, and we were talking about the visions of Fatima. And you believed in the idea of this experience and were defending it in a way to say that maybe that this was a good thing, that, the vision of Mary came and blah, 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 and all of that stuff. But I believe I heard you say tonight in questioning Joe that after listening to some of the things that he said about the visions of Fatima, that you said to yourself, wow, I never knew that. I totally agree with you. So what changed? What made you a non-believer in that experience?
I didn't. Well, the thing is that I didn't say that I didn't believe. What I said is that I saw what he had put forth. and it made sense. You know, his explanations of what they possibly could be. The mass, the spinning of the sun. His explanation about Fatima, you know, with seeing that, is that you take a lot of people and they stare directly at the sun. It could have been retinal damage. It could have been some kind of hallucination. I get that. I understand that. That makes sense to me. The part where the girl, that Lucia, you know, that she was prone to telling stories, I get that also. It doesn't change my total belief in it because I still believe that the Virgin Mary may have appeared. I still lean towards believing in that. But I do see what he said. I understand the points that he made because they were good explanations as to what the things that happened could be. He gave me scientific explanations of certain things that happened. I agree with that. I can see the logic in that. But here we go with the science eyes and my heart. My heart still tells me I still believe in that event. But it may not be the way it was presented. I think maybe, you know, of course everybody was excited. It could have been, you know, like it's sensationalism because that existed back then too. It may have been exaggerated to a point. I believe that. But I still believe something happened. I still believe that something happened. And because none of us were there, you know, I wasn't there, I can't say that it didn't happen. I understand what he's saying, and I agree with him. Okay? He's got an explanation for Roswell, you know, where everyone says that it's supposed to be a crashed UFO. Well, his explanation that it's a spy balloon that fell. And some of the points that he brought up, you know, about the first information that was out there. Okay, it makes sense. Doesn't change my total perception. And this is what I'm trying to say, too. It's like, okay, as a believer in some things, I still have to listen to the other side. I can't close my mind to another person's opinion. That would be wrong. That is against what I believe in. I believe that everybody has their own personal belief, but I also believe that you should listen to other people, that you can't close your mind and say, well, this is what I believe, and no matter what you say, you're wrong. So the thing about Fatima, some of the things really made sense, and I didn't have an argument against it. I couldn't come up with anything against it, except for faith. And again, you know, as we've said before, you know, there's no proof of faith. Faith is just something that you truly believe in your heart. I believe it's a real thing. So listening to his explanation of Fatima, I could see the scientific explanations. Some things I never thought about before. I never saw it in that way. And I understand it, and I believe what he said, but it doesn't change my bottom line belief in the event. I still believe something happened.
You know, I'm trying to figure out how do I put this into words. I'm trying to think of a way to I can't think of how to say this.
Just say it.
I'm trying to think of how do I put it. I have it in my head, but I can't figure out the words to express it. It's sort of like I don't know if I'm trying to say this right. There's different belief. There's different levels. It's not levels. I'll just say it anyway. I guess there's different levels of beliefs for people. Mm-hmm. You know, your level of belief in the paranormal, I believe, is different than mine. I believe that how you go about believing in the paranormal or how you go about even experiencing the paranormal is not very different, but it's different than the way that I interpret the paranormal. I can say that if I was called tomorrow to go to court and be on the stand and tell the jury how the paranormal is real, specifically afterlife, I think I could, based on not just my belief, but bringing forth evidence. With you, I think, and I could be wrong, you may have a harder time on that stand because most of it is your feelings, your you being an empath, the way that you receive things is what makes up your decision or your belief or your faith in things. And I'm not saying either one of these are good or bad. I'm just trying to point out the differences in people. Yeah, and how they resonate with a lot of different people. And I think that's why some groups do different things. I think that's why you see people, either, I hate this, but winning arguments or losing arguments with skeptics or debunkers out there, because the way that they believe their belief is different than someone who could possibly have. I don't know if I'm explaining it right. I'm not explaining it right now, so I'm going to stop because and that's the way that I am. If I can't explain it with true definition, I'm not going to go forward. I can't say I believe in Bigfoot. I can't say I believe in UFOs, even though I am fascinated with UFOs, and I believe that there is life on other planets and they have visited us. I believe it. But I'm not going to be able to get up on that stand and say UFOs exist and aliens exist because I can't share an experience, and two, I can't put forth any evidence that would be satisfactory in my opinion. I don't care about anybody else's opinion, but my opinion that it is a definite piece of evidence. I don't know if that makes sense, but I was just trying to point out the differences in beliefs, and so I don't know, I'm lost.
But see, no, I totally understand what you're saying. Yes, I would not be able to get on a stand, and I would not be able to convince anybody else of the paranormal because I don't have that documented evidence. Sure, I've got EVPs, sure, I've got pictures, I've got stuff like that, but I don't have anything that can to the scientific world, to Joe Nickell. I can't present anything that will definitely let him know that the paranormal exists. But yet, to me, it's all about me. I believe in it.
It's always all about you.
I believe in the paranormal because of the things that I have experienced. And I've said it before, your own experience is your own experience. It's not going to be the same as mine. It's not going to be the same as anybody else. And it boils down to what you yourself believe. You can share that with other people. You can share what you've experienced. You can share what evidence you have. But you're never really going to convince them until they experience it themselves. You can pick up a book about anything and read about anything. I see all these books about the law of attraction, okay? Some people swear by it. Some people say that they live it and they do. There are others that say, it doesn't work, okay? So, yeah, there's stuff out there, but you will never convince somebody of total that it really does exist and it really does work until they experience it themselves. So no matter what, you can preach and you can talk and you can tell, you can explain, but if a person just doesn't believe, they're not going to believe. Something in their own life, their own consciousness, their own being has to click. It happens at different times to different people. Some people never get it. Some people won't get it until they reach the other side. Some people don't believe there's another side. But until then, I think everybody owes it to keep the mind open, to keep the channels open, to keep the conversation going, to listen, to listen to people like Joe. Because, again, there might be just one little thing in what he says that might make sense to you, that might, temper what you do. Doesn't mean it's going to change your belief, and that's not the whole purpose of having a person like Joe on. I don't want to change anybody's belief, but I do want to give somebody a different side, and I think that's what we do with this show, is to bring different viewpoints, and that's all we can do, because somewhere out of all of this whole mess, an answer will come through to somebody. Hopefully it'll be an answer that pushes them to a different belief or to reinforce an existing belief.
Well, see, that's what I believe about the paranormal. And I think what may be the issue with many people who are within the paranormal field, that we try too hard to put forth evidence to convince other people that the paranormal does exist. And in the process, I think, possibly trying to convince themselves or validate themselves that the paranormal does exist. To me, I'm over that. I'm over the idea that there's a need to convince people. If somebody is not convinced of their own accord, then who am I to step in and say, you need to believe in this because here's what I've come up with. I can put forth that information, I can communicate that information, but getting into an argument or getting into a debate about something, to me, is completely useless, because you don't learn anything in a debate or in an argument. All you learn how to do, actually, is defend yourself. And at that point, you're not accepting anything. You're only putting up boundaries and walls around you. So I appreciate having Joe Nickell on the show. I'm sure that there are many people who have listened or will listen to the show and say, oh, you guys were wimps. You guys didn't hit him hard. You didn't get the good questions out there. You didn't stick it to him. Yeah, maybe, a part of me was thinking, I should do that. I should, have those one or two zingers and stump him. But I know I'm not going to stump him, because after 30, 40 years that he's been doing this, I'm sure that he has heard every single freaking question out there or theory out there that he has not had an answer for. And so to me, what's the point? And so what I wanted to do was try and see if I can gather more information from him and his experience, and try and understand him as a person and how he thinks. And how does a skeptic go from, or how does a skeptic become to be, to understand that their world ends when they die, and that there is no such thing as spirits or ghosts or UFOs or aliens or Bigfoot or whatever, based upon scientific evidence. I mean, I know it. I've seen it all the time with other people. There's the logic, there's the science, there's the theories, and those ideas that you have to go along with it, with reasoning, to get to the answer. I get it all. I understand it. But I'm interested in that because I know I can learn something from Joe. I can understand how a skeptic believes or not believes what he believes. That's interesting to me. That's where my head is at. I'm not into trying to say, you're an idiot. Why do you not believe the ghosts? I've got EVPs, I've got videos, and I've got photos, and there's tons on the internet. He can have you can have a rhetorical question answer back and forth that will just go nowhere, in my opinion. And I hate to waste energy, especially the energy that's going to live after we die.
See, now when he was talking about psychics and, like frauds and that, trust me, I wanted to ask him so badly, because in his, well, the way he talks about it, is that, you know, like psychics have all these things, you know, the frauds have things that they do. Okay, I wanted to ask him, it's like, okay, what about someone like me? I don't ask any questions. I never ask any questions. I let the messages come through, and what I get is right. It usually hits exactly 99% of the time. Those messages pertain to what that person has in their life. But everything I saw him, you know, read about and I heard him speak about had to do with people that set up things. And you know, I mean, things that as being, you know, me, I would definitely question. You know, if someone gives you all of these little fraud things, yeah, I could see them. I can understand that, which is the main reason why I don't ask questions. I just let the messages come through. I wanted to ask him about that, but you know what? That, I'm sure, I just didn't want to go there because I know what I believe. I know what I can do. And no matter what he says, I still know what I can do. It's just the way it is.
Well, you know, I do want to thank Joe Nickell for coming on the show. I think it was, you know, a really open and honest, you know, decent conversation to have with a skeptic that we've, you know, really never had. I mean, we've had people on that we, you know, there's been many people that we've had on the show that we don't believe in some of their things that they're claiming. And so it's no different than in any other guest that we've had. But we appreciated his time and his effort for talking with us, and his courage, actually, for talking with us. And so, you know, whether we try and convince people whether or not the paranormal is real, hold dear to your heart and your mind and your conscience that your belief in the paranormal is your belief in the paranormal. No one can change that. No one will dare to or can manipulate that in any way. And as science changes every single minute, and as I've pointed out today, science has changed day to day. Who's to say that tomorrow there's technology or there's some sort of theory that comes forth validating the paranormal? So I hate the corny phrase, but keep hope alive. So corny, I know.
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left. Let me get real quickly to the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week. This week, it is another viewer from YouTube. It is Bridget Harrison. Bridget watches us on YouTube, and she left us a lovely comment on one of our Scary Facts shows. She said, I just discovered your show, and let me say that I am hooked. You two play off each other so well, and hands down the best shows I have been your Scary Facts show. I'd love to see that show as a weekly feature, different than what I've seen around. Bridget, thank you so much for your kind words. Welcome to the family. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. And don't forget, if you guys want to be the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, all you have to do is just like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Okay, I want to talk about next week. This year, okay, everybody remembers we saw a televised exorcism of a home on TV, okay? This wasn't the first time that something like this was seen on television. In 1971, you didn't find quite as many people that believed in the paranormal. In fact, there were very few who would admit it publicly. Well, 24-year-old Ed Becker bought a 2-flat for himself and his wife. The couple was awaiting the birth of their child, but what they didn't expect was that the home that they had just bought already had tenants living in them. The building was built and occupied by a single family that refused to relinquish their hold, even after death. This building was investigated and verified by experts. This residence brought chaos to the lives of those who chose to reside there. Long before the laws of disclosure, this couple wound up in the midst of strange occurrences prior to the term paranormal becoming a common description. NBC filmed and televised The Exorcism of the Home. Edwin F. Becker wrote 2 books about this experience, True Haunting and True Haunting 2. And it's the story about what happened in that home and how it affected them. It's a story that's going to scare the heck out of you. Ed is going to be joining us next Friday night. He's going to share his story, and you really don't want to miss this one. Be there, keep the lights on as we find out what happened during a true haunting. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with us. Your love and support is what makes this so much fun. So until next week, Parapeeps, keep searching for the truth and have a paranormal week. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal